All right, so let's build the mentions feature that I have been talking about. To start, we need to track when the user presses the add symbol so we can present them some mentions options, some users from our application. And to do that tracking, we are going to use this library called Tribute. It's super easy to install. We just run npm install, but if you're using import maps Laravel, it also works. So let's do the npm install first. Then we can run composer run dev. Remember from the previous video that we created an extensions folder over here. So we are going to create another extension called user mention, and I'll just export a class over here. Similar to the typing one, we'll also receive the Trix editor element over here. So we can just create a constructor that will receive the element, and we can assign it. After assigning the element, we're going to call a method that we are going to create called initialize tribute. And let's create that method over here. Okay, now we can go to our extensions index file and we can instantiate the user mention class that we just created passing the Trix editor. Now we can go back to the extension that we are creating, and over here we need to initialize the tribute class. So if you go back to the documentation over here, you can see how we can do that. So we are just going to assign to a property that we are going to create called tribute, and we need to call it like this. And this will automatically import it. So we'll just add some settings to allow spaces. And this will make it so that when a user is typing a mention with spaces, we still present the options using the spaces to find the matches. Otherwise, a space would break out of the mentions and we don't want that. But they can still disable the mention by pressing escape. So we can just pass allow spaces, and to dimensions we are going to pass an array, and we have total control over the object structure, but we need to tell Tribute which attribute to use to find the matches on this list. And we are going to say that the name property should be used to find mentions. Now we have to give Tribute a way to find the values. So values will be a function that we define over here. So find mentions. And I'm going to bind that to this. So we can create this method, find mentions, like this. And over here, I'm just going to create the tribute attribute. And this find mentions will receive the text that the user is typing to find the mentions and a callback, so we can give tribute the options that it should present. In our case, let's just do console log, and then we'll call the callback passing nothing. But for this to work, we need to attach tribute to our element. So attach to this element. So we are attaching it to the content editable element that Trix creates, which is the Trix editor. And this should be enough. So if we refresh Open DevTools and press the add symbol, you're going to see that we start matching. We are displaying over here no match found. And as the user types, we can see that we are finding matches. We are calling that function that we just created. So now all we have to do is go back here and fire an AJAX request like this to get dimensions. And we can hard code it like this, but you can make this dynamic if you want to. Let's create a property over here called mentions URL, and we will allow the input, the Trix editor input, to define which URL should be used to find mentions. So we can give it like this. So we can get from the data set of the element from the DOM itself, and we can get the mentions URL from that. If it's not defined, then we can default to the /mentions endpoint. And over here, we can just use that, and we can append search to be the text that the user has typed. And just to show you what that does, we can go back to the application, start pressing type, and as you can see, we are looking for /mentions. But if we go back to the sharps index file, we can find the Trix input editor over here, and we can define a data mentions URL, and this could be anything. So projects 123 mentions, something like that. And as the user types, we can see that that URL is being used instead of the /mentions. But for now, let's keep it as /mentions. And now, whatever we get back from this mentions endpoint, we can pass it to the callback like this. If we receive any error, we just call the callback passing nothing, and that should be it. Now we have to go to our web routes file, and over here we can create our own route for mention, and we can return anything over here. So let me type in the request, and then if there is no search, then we just return an empty array. Otherwise, we'll find where like name, we'll use this request input search like this. Then we'll take, I don't know, maybe 5 of those and order by name, and we'll get that. And this should be /mentions. Okay, now let's get back over here and let's try to use it. Oh, so as you can see, some options are being displayed over here, and that's good, but there's no styling on this. So let's fix that. If we go to the tribute documentation, there is an example over here. And if we check the source, there is an example tribute CSS over here that we can copy and paste, but I have prepared some examples over here that I'm gonna use. So I'm gonna open the app.css file, and right here, I'm gonna paste these styles. So it's about 26 lines, and that should be it. So if we go back to our application, it's much better now. So, okay, so as the user types, the options will be presented. So Tony, and I got myself, and T, and all that. So yeah, so the options are being presented nicely. If I press enter though, you'll see that something is not right over here. And that's because Tribute is trying to change the content editable HTML, but you're not supposed to do that with Trix. The content editable on Trix is basically just an interface. Everything that happens on that interface will be sent to the document model, and the change that happened to the document model will be reflected on the content editable. So we're not actually supposed to change the content editable in the HTML directly. Instead, we have to override some methods on Tribute. And to do that, let's go back to our extension over here. And this method is inside the Tribute instance in the range paste HTML. And we'll use our own version of the paste HTML like this. And let's create that method. And this will receive the HTML that Tribute is trying to replace in the content editable field with the start position and the end position. Now we need to compute the offset. So we need to get the range from the editor. So element editor get selected range. This will be like the current position of the editor. So where the cursor is right now. And this will return an array with the position of the cursor. So we just need to get the first position on that. And now we need to compute the offset. So end position minus the start position. This is how many characters we should delete from the Trix editor. Now all we have to do is get the editor, set the selected range to be equal to the position minus the offset until the position itself. Then we can record undo entry, user mention, and we can delete in direction, and that direction will be backward. So that should be it. We're not actually using the HTML because we are going to use something else, some other way. Now, if we try that and we pick one of the options, the editor is cleared, but it's not actually entirely cleared. It's just replacing whatever the user has typed until the option is selected. So we just delete that so we can insert the mention ourselves. But before we do that, we need to make our user model. We need to turn that into an attachable. So let's go to the user model and make it implement the attachable contract of the Rich Text Laravel package. Now we can just use the attachable trait over here, but I'm actually going to create a user mentionee trait. This trait doesn't exist, so let's create that mentionee. So this mentionee trait will use the attachable contract like this. And if we go back, if we save and go back to the user model, you can see that we're not fulfilling the contract over here yet. And that's because we need to implement the rich text render. All we have to do is we need to render some view, rich text Laravel, attachables, user mention like this. And I'm gonna pass the user, and that user will be this. We receive some options which we're not going to use, but I'm just going to pass down. And we need to return a string. So let's render that. Now let's create that view. And over here, I'm just gonna create a snippet like this. And that will be it for now. So we should go back to our web route, and we need to return the signed global ID just like we are doing for attachments over here. We need to return something like that. So let's map this to an array, and we return the signed global ID of the user and the name, which Tribute is gonna use to find the matches, and the content over here, which is rich text render, and the content type, rich text content type. This is actually provided by the attachable trait, but I'm gonna copy that and go back to our mention e, and I'm gonna override it because I like to keep it consistent. And vendor chirper, which is my application, user mention HTML. There's nothing special about it, it's just HTML, a variant of HTML. So now we can go back here, and if we try that again, we should get the same stuff. But now, if we see the response that we get from the backend, you can see that we are returning the signed global ID over here, the name, the content type, and the content. I can see that it's actually returning a line break over here. I don't want that. So what we can do over here is trim it. And I don't want that because it's an inline mention, so it shouldn't actually have spaces there. So let's try that again, Tony, and see what we get. And no line. That's good. So now all we have to do is insert a new attachment to Trix. And we can take a look at how we can do that. Trix attachment over here, inserting content attachment. Content attachments are self-contained units of HTML that behave like files in the editor. So this is exactly what we are going to do. So we'll go to our user extension, and we need to listen to a tribute replaced event. So you can bind to this event to know when we have updated the tribute element, right? In our case, tribute will think that it actually replaced, but it didn't replace because we didn't let it replace it. So we need to listen to this event and get the detail item from that. I'm gonna register a callback over here in the initialize tribute, this line over here. So add event listener and paste that, and then add mention binding to this. This method doesn't exist, so we're gonna create it. And we receive the event, but we are only interested in the detail property of the event. And from the detail, we are only interested in the item. So let's console log that. And if we try again, refresh, then we should get an object with the original property being our object that we return from our API. So that's actually what we want. So we need to get the element like this, the editor, and then insert attachment. And we need to create that attachment. So attachment will be equals to new Trix attachment, like this. And we need to pass an object to it, but in our case, the original object is actually in the shape that we need to pass it down, so we don't actually have to do anything else. So if we try that, you can see that it's actually working. Pretty cool. The only thing that I'm gonna do differently over here is insert a string over here. So when we try that again, the user can continue typing. It's just faster this way. But this is pretty boring, right? If we take a look at the element itself, we can see that the Trix attribute over here has the content type, has the name, has the signed global ID, so it has everything. It would be cool if we could change the HTML displayed inside the input to something else, right? And that's exactly what we are going to do. So let's go back to our user mention blade, and I'm gonna paste it over here, and this snippet is just an example. So I'm gonna select Tony, and yeah, that's it actually. That's all you have to do. If we save it now, it should all be working, and it does. So if we add it, you can see that it all just works. And similarly, if we go to Tinker and we find the latest chirp and we get the attachables from that content, from the content field, we can see that we can extract the user object. And we are not actually storing this HTML in the editor. It's not actually that relevant, the HTML itself, because it will always re-render. So what we can do over here is run composer, run dev again. And let's change this from purple to the sky blue. Yeah, that should be cool. Okay, that's it actually. You have total control over the styles of the user attachment. So if you change your styles later on, you can change how the mentions are displayed over here. So yeah, that's how you can build the user mention feature. And what's extra cool about this is that this is not actually just the HTML. If the user changes the name over here and save, and I go back, all the references to that name are actually reflected into all dimensions, and you didn't have to do anything. The HTML in the database didn't change because we're not actually storing the HTML. We only store the signed global ID, which is a reference to the user. So whatever changes happen to this user will be reflected no matter where the user is embedded to. Let me just return over here and save it again. Even though we are actually mentioning users over here, we are not doing the notification part. So one thing that we could do over here is extract dimensions. So let me show how you could do something like that. I'm going to create a mention model, and we are going to create mentions table migration. And over here, we are going to create a foreign ID for the user, another field for Sherp, for the Sherp ID, and we also need a unique constraint on the user ID and the Sherp ID columns, because it doesn't matter how many times you mention someone, they will only be referenced once, so there is only going to be one notification for them. In my made up scenario, of course. In your application, you can do whatever you want. So now we need to go to the Sherp model, and over here I'm going to introduce a new trait. So Sherp mentions like this, and I'm gonna create that Sherp folder, mentions.php, and it's also a trait. And over here, let's create a method called boot mentions. Should be static, and it's actually similar to the has rich text attachment. So I'm gonna copy that part and paste it over here. And instead of syncing attachments, we are going to sync mentions. And over here, we are going to get dimensions, and we will delete them. So we'll add a mentions relationship over here, and we have to import the mention model. Now we can create the private sync mentions function that will return void. And this function, it's actually important that we do this asynchronously because of the way the saving happens. The rich text model is actually an external model that is saved through a relationship. So the saved method over here on the Sherp is not actually the same time the rich text model is saved. But if you're using transactions, you should use after commit, or if you're using queues, that also solves it. In our case, I'm gonna keep it simple and use the for over here. So now we can extract dimensions like this. If you're not doing this in an async way, you gotta clone the content rich text model like this. We can get the attachables, and from these attachables, we can filter to only attachables of the user class. So only mentions. Remember that images are also attachable, so we are not creating mentions to images and values, so we don't actually care about the position of the arrays. And then we can delete every mention that is not in this mentions list, and we can pluck the ID out of the collection like this, and we have to give it a user ID, the field to delete, and then we can call delete on it. So we are deleting every mention associated with this Sherp that is not in the mentions, that is not inside this Sherp content document. So now we just have to upsert mentions, and to do that we just map over this, and we receive the user object like this, and then we return a user ID, which should be equal to user get key, and then Sherper ID, which should be equal to this get key, because we are in the Sherper model. And then we need to convert this to an array. We give it the unique keys like this, and yeah, that should be it actually. Oh, and this should actually be Sherp ID, not Sherper. So now we can close Composer Run Dev and run PHP Artisan Migrate and run Composer Run Dev again. So now let's mention someone and save, and everything should work. So we should have, if we open Tinker, we should be able to get the latest chirp and find the mentions, and we do. And for that, we don't actually need to go through the content model and find the attachables and all that. We don't actually have to do this anymore. We can just find dimensions directly. So this is cool because then we could say, like, let's say you have drafts chirp, right? So you could just say if this chirp is a draft, then return like this. So you're not actually creating mentions for drafts anymore. And then you could actually hook into the mention event, and then you can dispatch database notifications to the users that were mentioned here, or something like that. I hope you can see how powerful content attachables are in Trix. You can pretty much embed anything, and later you can extract that thing and do whatever you want with it. So yeah, the applications are pretty much limitless. So yeah, that's it. That's mentions. That's how you can build mentions in Trix. And I'll see you in the next video where we're going back to the feature that we discussed in the first video, and we are going to rebuild that. And that will probably be the last video of this series. So I hope you're excited for that one, and I hope you like this video. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.